It was a night that should have been silent. On the southeastern border of Burkina Faso, the clock struck past midnight when the calm was broken by an unfamiliar hum. Out of the darkness, the glow of unmanned drones appeared, circling above like watchful eyes. Moments later, a convoy of vehicles, its purpose unknown, its cargo still a mystery, was struck with surgical precision. By dawn, nothing remained but twisted metal and smoke curling into the sky. The world awoke to headlines it could not ignore. Drone strike in Burkina Faso. Yet the deeper story was not about the blast itself, but the questions it unleashed. Who authorized this operation? Was it a sovereign act of defense, a covert warning, or the first sign that African nations are no longer playing by old rules? For many years, only powerful global nations with enormous budgets could afford and control drone warfare. However, in this African country, often considered less significant, sophisticated technology was employed in a manner that compelled major world capitals like Washington, Paris, and London to take notice. This event was more than a mere attack. It was a message, a declaration that Africa is stepping into a new era where autonomy is defended not only with words, but with tools once thought exclusive to the West. So we must ask, was this the opening shot of a new balance of power, or simply a mysterious warning meant to unsettle the old order? The silence after the strike was broken not by denial but by confirmation. Within hours, President Ibrahim Traoré's office admitted the truth. Yes, the order had come from the highest level. This was not an accident, not a rogue operation. It was a calculated demonstration of capability. For the first time in Burkina Faso's history, the world had to reckon with an African leader openly taking responsibility for a drone strike. And the drone itself was no ordinary machine. Intelligence reports identified it as a North Korean prototype, retrofitted with Russian navigation systems, and adapted for command through the AES, Africa's new joint security network, linking Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Consequently, this represented more than just military equipment. It served as evidence of a growing alliance among multiple powers. Africa, traditionally viewed as a stage for foreign technologies, had unexpectedly become a leader in their application. Yet the real shock came from the investigation at the crash site. What was left of the mysterious convoy revealed layers of intrigue. Among the debris were fragments of American-manufactured rifles, encrypted radios stamped with French serial codes, and maps of resource corridors printed in English. Even more startling, forensic teams discovered military ID tags tied to Nigerian operatives, raising questions about whether regional neighbors had been infiltrated or manipulated. The financial trail only deepened the mystery. Transactions linked to the convoy's logistics pointed toward shell companies registered in London, Paris, and Abu Dhabi. Analysts estimated these firms had moved over $75 million USD in just 6 months, funds likely earmarked for destabilization campaigns. Two code names surfaced repeatedly in the recovered documents: Falcon Hand and DC Handler. No one could say for certain what they meant, but whispers in diplomatic circles suggested links to covert networks operating well beyond Africa's borders. For the Burkina Faso public, the revelation was both vindication and alarm. While many viewed Traoré's swift action as affirmation that their country would no longer tolerate external interference, it simultaneously validated anxieties that covert forces, including mercenaries and international corporations, were plotting against Africa's independence. Meanwhile, in Western nations, the reaction was notably distinct. Analysts debated whether this was a reckless provocation or a masterstroke of deterrence. Financial markets reacted cautiously, with energy investors quietly warning that if such strikes escalated, billions of dollars in contracts across the Sahel could be at risk. So we must ask, was this drone strike a one-time message to protect Burkina Faso's sovereignty, or the opening chapter of a new era where African states wield technological power to expose the shadows around them? The world was still reeling from the confirmation of Traoré's drone strike when another revelation emerged, this time not from the battlefield, but from the shadows of intelligence briefings. Inside a secure chamber in Ouagadougou, the AES Council, bringing together Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, was urgently convened. The atmosphere was electric, tense, and charged with a sense of history being written in real time. Cameras were banned, phones confiscated, but a single phrase leaked from the meeting captured global attention. "If they send ghosts, we send thunder." It was Traoré's declaration, a warning to those who believed Africa would remain vulnerable to mercenaries and covert sabotage. The urgency was not symbolic. Security agencies had intercepted a disturbing encrypted message, which was subsequently deciphered. Its code name was both harsh and revealing. Operation Broken Spine, 72 hours. The target, Burkina Faso's Kudu oil refinery, a facility valued at over 1.3 billion USD, and more importantly, a symbol of economic independence in the Sahel. Built with partnerships beyond the traditional Western sphere, Kudu was more than industrial steel. It was a statement that Africa could refine its own resources, dictate its own prices, and free itself from the exploitative chains of imported fuel dependency. The intercepted documents contained more than vague threats. Satellite imagery revealed convoys assembling near the southeastern border, suspiciously aligned with the refinery's coordinates. Metadata from radio chatter suggested an imminent strike window calculated down to the hour. The refinery was to be crippled before its full-scale launch, an act of sabotage that would not only halt Burkina Faso's dream of energy sovereignty, but also send a chilling message to any African nation daring to defy external control. Faced with this intelligence, the AES leadership debated with gravity. Some argued for quiet diplomacy, fearing escalation that could draw the entire region into chaos. But Traoré saw the matter differently. He viewed Kudu as more than just a facility. It represented the fundamental strength of a nation striving for self-sufficiency. Permitting its destruction would signify an ongoing reliance on others. The decision then was swift and uncompromising. The convoy identified as the imminent threat would be neutralized. This was the true context behind the drone strike. The operation was not random aggression, but a preemptive shield against sabotage. The vehicles that vanished into smoke under the midnight drones were not traders or travelers. They were armed units, their cargo loaded with explosives. Their mission clear. Protecting Kudu was not just about safeguarding a refinery. It was about defending the future revenues projected at 400 million US annually. These funds were earmarked by Burkina Faso for investment in education, healthcare, and technological advancement. Economically, the decision to strike was a trade-off. Either forego decades of potential development or face an immediate conflict. Still, the disclosures prompted more inquiries than they resolved. Who funded Operation Broken Spine? The documents traced payments through shell companies in London, Paris, and Abu Dhabi. Who trained the mercenaries? Evidence suggested a blend of Western-manufactured weapons and regional operatives with Nigerian insignias found among the wreckage. And above all, who was the DC handler, the shadowy name embedded in every intercepted file? Was it a code name for a foreign intelligence officer or a symbolic reference to power centers far beyond Africa's borders? For many Africans, however, the details mattered less than the symbolism. Once again, their continent was targeted not because of weakness, but because of its growing strength. The refinery represented the possibility of breaking free from a cycle where raw resources are exported cheaply, only to be re-imported at high costs, draining national budgets. By striking first, Traoré had chosen resistance over submission, sovereignty over silence. A contradiction emerged, however. Although the drone attack protected the nation's autonomy, it also attracted the attention of formidable opponents. Western leaders, unnerved by the bold actions of a Sahelian country, started to wonder if other African governments would follow a similar strategy. International investors fretted about political risk, even as African citizens celebrated a leader willing to act. The world's financial press estimated that if such assertive strategies spread, foreign corporations could lose 101 to 12 billion USD annually in easy profits extracted from Africa. And so the questions remain sharper than ever. Was Traoré's strike a masterstroke of preemptive defense, or a gamble that will invite even more attempts at sabotage? Can a small nation armed with intelligence and conviction hold its ground against networks backed by global powers? The midnight strike was shocking enough, but the true revelation came afterward when defense analysts identified the weapon used. It was not an off-the-shelf drone, nor a borrowed platform from foreign allies. It was something far more unsettling for the West. This was a secretly developed system called the NA-7, resulting from a discreet partnership among Burkina Faso, North Korea, and Russia. Capable of flying almost 800 km, the NA-7 could penetrate far into enemy lands and stay hidden until it was too late to react. Equipped with heat-seeking missiles and sophisticated fragmentation warheads, its ability to cause damage was beyond dispute. But what stunned military experts most was its precision. Powered by an AI-guided navigation system and integrated with AES's encrypted network, the NA-7 demonstrated the ability to strike a target with surgical accuracy, completing its mission in just 12 minutes from command to execution. International observers admitted something uncomfortable. Neither the US nor France had demonstrated this level of battlefield efficiency in the Sahel. Western drones often relied on satellite relays, vulnerable to jamming, and carried higher risks of civilian casualties. The NA-7, by contrast, delivered impact without collateral damage, earning the nickname in defense circles the clean blade of Ouagadougou. For Burkina Faso, the symbolism was immense. In a single operation, the country had shifted perceptions from being seen as a pawn of global powers to proving it could field cutting-edge technology born from strategic alliances. For Africa, it raised a larger question. If one of the continent's smaller states could develop such capacity, what might be possible if others followed? For Western nations, the NA-7 presented a troubling predicament. They faced a choice: either adjust to an Africa now able to protect its independence with advanced technology, or try to weaken it before the global power dynamic shifted even more significantly. The attack itself was brief, but its political repercussions would resonate for a long time. When investigators combed through the remnants of the destroyed convoy, they uncovered evidence that stunned the region. The so-called mercenaries were not shadowy freelancers after all. They were former Nigerian special forces, men who had once worn the insignia of one of West Africa's largest armies. Their training records, quietly leaked to the press, revealed something more disturbing. Many had been drilled at bases, funded, supplied, and sometimes overseen by Western partners. For Traoré's government, the revelation confirmed what many had long suspected, that the destabilization of Africa often came not from faceless outsiders, but from within, through soldiers repurposed as private contractors after careers built under foreign tutelage. The implications were enormous. Could a neighboring state claim ignorance when its veterans appeared in convoys aimed at sabotaging Burkina Faso's most strategic refinery? Or was Nigeria itself caught in a web of dependency and manipulation, unable to control the very forces it had once trained? Digital forensic investigations revealed even more. Experts tracked encrypted communications from the mercenary group to servers located in Langley, Virginia, a place associated with U.S. intelligence. Although the U.S. government provided no formal comment, these digital traces sparked intense discussion in media outlets across Africa and the world. Was this proof of direct intervention or simply a cover laid by actors skilled at disinformation? For Traoré's allies, the motive was clear. His government had crossed every red line of the old order, nationalizing oil assets once controlled by multinationals, expelling French forces from Sahel bases, and refusing IMF terms that would have shackled Burkina Faso with another generation of debt. In the eyes of entrenched powers, these moves were not reforms, they were provocations. And yet, in the eyes of the Burkinabe public, they were acts of liberation. Western capitals whispered about escalation, but African streets saw something else. A leader willing to defend sovereignty, not with rhetoric alone, but with decisive action. Markets, too, felt the tension. Energy analysts warned that if drone warfare became the new tool of resource defense, contracts worth 15 to 20 billion US annually across the Sahel could be jeopardized. Investors expressed concern, yet everyday Africans posed a more straightforward query. Why are our natural resources consistently prioritized for foreign benefit over our own? Consequently, the drone strike transcended being merely a military action. It was a mirror held up to the world, reflecting both Africa's determination and the desperation of those who had long profited from its weakness. But here is the haunting question. If Burkina Faso could expose these hidden hands, how many more nations will now begin to scrutinize the shadows behind their own crises? The dust of the drone strike had barely settled when Captain Ibrahim Traoré stepped before the microphones. His words, sharp and deliberate, reverberated across Africa. If you send agents in the shadows, don't be surprised when we send fire. It was not just a military statement. It was a declaration of doctrine, a promise that Burkina Faso and its Sahel allies would not bow quietly to hidden hands. The reaction on the ground was immediate and electric. In Ouagadougou, tens of thousands poured into Independence Square, waving flags and chanting slogans that echoed far beyond the capital. Similar scenes erupted in Bamako and Niamey, where citizens saw the strike not as an act of recklessness, but as proof that their nations were finally standing on equal footing with powers that had long dismissed them. T-shirts emblazoned with "Don't Mess with Sovereignty" were sold by street vendors, and murals quickly appeared, portraying drones as symbols of African autonomy instead of external control. This enthusiasm extended beyond public spaces to social media, where hashtags such as "You Don't Mess with Sovereignty" and "Sahel Rising" became continent-wide trends, reaching millions in a matter of days. A viral TikTok video of university students in Dhaka reenacting Traoré's declaration racked up over 2 million views, while a remix of his speech set to Afrobeat rhythms became the unofficial anthem of the movement. Analysts estimated that the online momentum generated an advertising equivalent value of nearly $40 million USD. A reminder that in the digital age, narratives can become as powerful as weapons. Even more striking was the role of art and culture. Graffiti artists in Bamako painted walls with the slogan, "Sovereignty is not negotiable," while spoken-word poets in Nima recited verses celebrating resistance to neocolonialism. Local filmmakers began producing short clips dramatizing the drone strike, portraying it as a David versus Goliath moment in which African nations had finally refused to be pawns. Culture became protest and protest became unity. At the regional level, the strike sparked urgent diplomatic conversations. Leaders of the AES bloc, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger issued a joint communiqué affirming that any attack on one member would be treated as an attack on all. This statement, though, carried weight. This action elevated what could have been seen as a solitary risk into a shared regional policy of mutual protection. The African Union faced a dilemma. Either disavow Traoré's audacious move or accept it as a new standard for African independence. The most profound reaction, however, came from ordinary citizens. Across the Sahel, young people declared that the time for silent endurance had ended. For decades, they had watched resources leave their soil while poverty stayed behind. Now, with one act of defiance, they felt seen, heard, and vindicated. The psychological shift was as important as the military strike itself. Africans began to believe that sovereignty was not just a word in speeches, but a principle worth defending with action. Yet this surge of pride carried a haunting question. Would this unity endure when foreign powers inevitably pushed back with economic pressure, sanctions, or covert retaliation? Or would the regional solidarity born from fire prove strong enough to reshape Africa's future on its own terms? The drone strike did not just shake the Sahel, it rattled the corridors of global power. Washington issued a cautious statement, advocating for calm and discussion, indicating discomfort without outright disapproval. Paris, in contrast, delivered a more pointed warning, stating that such actions endangered regional stability. Both the European Union and NATO expressed similar worries, characterizing the event as the start of new unrest in Africa. Western media headlines blared phrases like Africa on fire and unpredictable Traoré, painting the young leader as both dangerous and defiant. But Traoré did not retreat into silence. Standing before cameras in Ouagadougou, he fired back. "You armed the mercenaries. You lit the fuse. We struck back." His words cut through the noise of diplomatic spin and resonated with audiences worldwide. Clips of his speech went viral, circulating across Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. In less than 48 hours, one montage of his defiant stance surpassed 12 million views, with comments hailing him as a real leader and the voice Africa has been waiting for. The ripple effect was profound. Historically, Western portrayals often depicted African leaders as either reliant or silent. However, the sight of a young president confidently resisting both hidden attacks and international pressure captivated audiences globally. This, however, brings forth a crucial inquiry. Will international powers double down to contain this defiance? Or are we witnessing the first step toward a truly multipolar world where Africa asserts its own rules? The drone strike was more than a flash of fire in the night. It was the spark that lit a continental movement. Within days, leaders of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger convened in Nema for an emergency summit. The agenda was not simply to issue statements or trade accusations. It was to design a shield strong enough to withstand the storms they knew would follow. From that summit emerged what would soon be called Operation Iron Shield. The declaration was bold. The three nations would integrate their military intelligence, pull satellite data from emerging partnerships with Russia and China, and establish a shared command center. Individual nations would no longer have to confront secret destabilization efforts by themselves. Encrypted communication channels from Ouagadougou to Bamako to Niamey were integrated into a unified system, AESnet, intended to identify dangers preemptively. Furthermore, the leaders declared combined air patrols, utilizing drones and fighter jets under a single banner. The commitment was summed up in one sentence that electrified their citizens. An attack on one is an attack on all. For the Sahel, this was unprecedented. For decades, military cooperation had been fragmented, often filtered through Western missions, such as France's operation. Imagine this. The most powerful office in the world tries to corner Africa once again, this time with tariffs sharp enough to cut into gold, oil, and every lifeline of trade. To Washington, it seemed like a familiar playbook. Apply pressure, remind Africa of its place, and watch leaders fold under fear of losing billions of US dollars in revenue. But then silence broke. A single voice rose, not in apology, not in negotiation, but in defiance. Ibrahim Traoré, a young leader many dismissed as temporary, looked straight into the storm and declared, "Africa is done kneeling." The words were not just sound bites. These words signified a break from the past, fundamentally altering the situation. The discussion moved beyond just tariffs and trade regulations. It was about dignity, about sovereignty, about whether Africa would continue to survive on borrowed power or finally stand on its own. The crowd felt it. Social media lit up. Analysts called it reckless, but students, workers, and everyday people across the continent called it revolutionary. This wasn't a speech. It was a line drawn in the sand, a challenge not only to America, but to centuries of economic chains. And so we must ask, if one leader can stop the game with just 9 words, what happens when an entire continent echoes the same defiance? Tariffs, once again, the West's old weapon of choice. When diplomacy falters, when persuasion fails, Washington has often reached for the same lever. These were economic restrictions presented as legitimate trade regulations. The current tariffs were unmistakably targeted. Instead of targeting non-essential goods, these American tariffs struck at Africa's core industries, including gold, essential for budgets, cotton and cocoa, vital for global commerce, and staple foods, crucial for millions. Numbers tell the story. A 15% tariff on African textiles can erase nearly 1.2 to 2 billion in export earnings. A levy on cocoa threatens the livelihoods of over 3 million farmers across West Africa. It is a strategy as old as empire. Make the essentials costly, squeeze the margins, and wait for leaders to beg for relief. And yet, the calculation goes deeper. Weaken Africa's negotiating power, fracture regional solidarity, and ensure dependency continues. For Western policymakers, tariffs are not just percentages on paper. They are leverage, a silent weapon designed to keep entire economies within reach of their influence. But here is the question burning through every newsroom, every lecture hall, and every marketplace. What occurs when countries previously compelled to submit refuse to tolerate such economic constraints? Is it possible for an entire continent to convert tariffs, originally meant as a weapon, into a catalyst for self-determination? A powerful spirit of resistance swept across the Sahel region. When the tariff ultimatum arrived, Traoré did not flinch. He did not bargain. He rejected it outright. No compromise, no hesitation. In his words, tariffs were nothing more than blackmail dressed as economics. Overnight, Burkina Faso, a country often dismissed as small and peripheral, became the epicenter of a global trade quake. Washington expected silence. Instead, they were met with resistance. Analysts estimated that U.S. tariffs threatened nearly $600 million in African exports annually. Yet Traoré's refusal transformed numbers into symbols, turning economic pressure into political theater. Many Africans viewed this as the first instance in many decades where a leader openly defied the West, declaring an end to subservience. The repercussions were swift. International news outlets portrayed the event as a significant embarrassment for President Trump. How could the President of the United States be openly challenged by a landlocked nation with a GDP smaller than some U.S. states? But to millions watching, this wasn't about size, it was about sovereignty. About a leader refusing to sell dignity for short-term relief. The question now looms larger than tariffs. If Burkina Faso can flip the board against Washington, what might happen if an entire continent plays the same hand? A clash of visions stood naked before the world. On one side, Washington still played the role of self-appointed referee, wielding tariffs like a whip, convinced that a few percentage points on gold, cotton, or cocoa could bend nations back into line. On the other side, Africa, led by Traoré's defiance, declared that trade must never be reduced to a weapon against sovereignty. For Burkina Faso, and for millions watching across the continent, this was not about a line in a customs ledger. This represented the declining influence of a once dominant power. Let's look at the figures. Independent trade analysts estimate that American tariffs could impose approximately $2.1 billion in restrictions on African exports. But what shook people more than the dollar figure was the arrogance behind it. The idea that access to markets could be